Good to see you. You awake? You should be awake today, okay? Got that extra sleep. You 11:30 people, you slept in too, didn't you? I know how you roll. Hey, it's good to be together today. My name's Jared. I'm one of the pastors here. Let's give a big shout out and welcome to all of our campuses. Those watching online, welcome to you. We have been in this series, Roadblocks to Faith, and we've been looking at some real-life questions that I think are obstacles to our faith. And I think we've covered some really important and good ground over the past few weeks. If you've missed it, maybe let me encourage you, go back on the YouTube, on the church website, wherever. Just give it a quick watch some of those past messages. But don't just watch them for yourselves. Let me also encourage you to share those with somebody. Turns out a lot of people have questions about all that is going on in the world and how it connects with our faith. And maybe you have some friends that the questions we've answered would be helpful for them. Go on and share those links or maybe invite them with you over the next couple of weeks, all right? We also just have some great resources there. If you want to dive a little bit deeper, you can text the word HOPE to 94062. A lot of great resources parked on the website. You can check all those out as well, okay? Last week, Ben talked about one of our favorite subjects, politics. It was great, okay? And I know that the week coming up, it's a tough one for many of us. We're sick of the razzmatazz of all of the election cycle and season and all of that. It's a lot for us. Some of us, we get a bowl of popcorn and we just buckle up for it. We are ready for the week that's about to unfold. While others, this week, it stirs up fear and anxiety, maybe even anger. And in the heat of the political moment, arguments erupt. Judgmental attitudes start to seep out and into our lives. And in the hours and days ahead, disunity can easily sneak in and mess up the good stuff that God is doing here. And we don't want that to be the case, okay? Don't worry, I'm not going to preach on politics today. We've been there, done that. Ben did it last week. He told you who you should vote for or how to vote, something like that. You got to watch it to understand, okay? But what I do want to do today is invite you to a very special prayer and worship night that is happening tonight. You 11:30 people, go grab lunch. Come on back, all right? 6:30 p.m. tonight. It'll be a chance for us just all to get together and have a night just of prayer and worship as we seek to be unified around the lordship of Jesus in what is a very tough political season. Who should come tonight? Everybody. You should, okay? You should. If you're at peace this season, bring your peace with you. If you're frustrated, bring your frustration. If you're angry, bring your anger. Nothing is more important right now than our unity in Christ, and this is the perfect time for us to rally together and give praise to the one who will still hold the world in his hands 4 years from now. Okay? So we're going to do that tonight. I hope you'll join us for it. Don't let the election be a roadblock to your faith, okay? Now, let's move on to this week. I'm going to start with a little bit of a question for parents in the room. How many of you parents, you've ever, you've had to watch your child go through some kind of intense pain? It's a really hard thing to experience as a parent. It's just a few years back, my daughter, Ella, she was outside playing with a bunch of friends, and she was running down the sidewalk. And as she was running down the sidewalk, she kind of clipped her toe on the lip of an uneven piece of sidewalk in our townhome community. And she face planted, bit it, face right in the concrete. And she starts screaming her head off. She's crying. She's upset. I'm not out there. I'm inside. I'm chilling. This little boy runs up to the door and starts banging on it. Mr. Jared, Ella's hurt. It's oh, good goodness. So I do what any good dad would do. I run over and I throw open the door and I yell, "Hey, Ella, get up. You're going to be okay. Shake it off." And I look down and she does get up very, very slowly. And as she stands up, I could see her arm. These suckers are supposed to be straight. Well, hers wasn't, as my grandpa would say, it was as crooked as a dog's hind leg, okay? It came down and it kind of jettied off to the side. And I ran out and I grabbed her and I brought her inside and I put her on the couch. And one of the things I realized as I brought her inside is the timing of this isn't great. You ever realize when bad things kind of happen in life, when something comes and disrupts it, it's always at the worst possible time. I'm busy, my wife is busy, life is busy. And so I look at my wife, she's on the couch crying, my wife's standing next to me, and I go, "Do you think it's broken?" "I'm not sure. It doesn't look that bad. Let's give her a day or two and see what happens, okay?" And my wife looks at me, she's like, "Get your butt in the car and take her to the doctor." So I do. I take her to the doctor. We get to the doctor, and the whole way there, she's just crying in pain. She's miserable. This poor girl. Just excruciating pain. And we get there, and we realize they do an x-ray, and the x-ray is bad. It's real bad. She's going to need surgery. And so they schedule the surgery for a couple days later. Over those couple days, I just watched my little girl go through excruciating pain. Intense pain since the moment the break happened. We get to the hospital, and she kind of she gets a little courageous. She gives me a little smile. This is her when we first get to the hospital. She had a pretty good attitude about it at first. That is, until she realized what was about to happen to her, and then her attitude went to that, okay? Like, she was scared out of her mind. She was freaking out. She'd never had surgery before. She'd never wanted surgery. She was pretty sure that nothing good could come for the moment that she is about to enter into. And so the doctors, they take her into the room. They got to give her gas to kind of get her to fall asleep. And I don't know what happens. I don't know how it happens, but she gets her spidey strength. And all of a sudden, she's got the strength of 10 men. These doctors cannot get the mask on her face. She's throwing doctors against the wall. She's pushing stuff like all over the place. The doctors look at me and like, hey, Dad, why don't you come and help us out? I'm like, nope, I know how much this costs. This is your problem, all right? You got it. Now, I do what any good dad would do. I go in, and I get up on the hospital bed with her, and she is just losing her mind, so I wrap my arms around her, and she's struggling, and she's fighting, and I just whisper into her, babe, it's okay, I got you. It's okay, babe, I got you. And something about my presence in that moment, she started to loosen up. She started to give up on the struggle. She started to, tension left. She calmed down a little bit, just enough, still crying, still upset. And as those cries came, they slipped the mask over her face, and she falls asleep right into my arms, just this little limp body. It's just a broken arm, but that moment, my heart sank, and all I could think about was, why does she have to go through this? I hurt so badly for her, but I also had perspective to see what was coming. I knew in this moment that there was hope that the pain would go away. There was hope that the break would heal. There was a future where healing fully comes. My little girl was going through this pain. It was overtaking her physically and emotionally, and so I wrapped my arms around her, and somehow, some way there, she found comfort. She didn't want the surgery to happen. I didn't want the surgery to happen. But the surgery needed to happen, followed by a cast with rods. I could see what was in store for her. It was healing, but we had to go through this moment. And I sat through that pain with her, and I couldn't help but think about how that pain is just a microcosm of the pain and suffering that she will feel in this life, that we all do to some degree. I mean, there's so many complex and serious problems the world is facing. Problems that kind of just thrust great tragedy and heartbreak and hurt and pain and suffering into life all around us. You feel me a little bit on that? Just think about the suffering that so many have experienced lately just from the wake of natural disasters. We're all familiar with Helene and what happened in Asheville, right? Here's a before picture of Asheville. Helene comes through, and here's the after. Complete devastation. And if that wasn't enough, well, here comes Milton. And Milton comes in, and it takes this beautiful scene in Florida and turns it upside down. And once again, we see tragedy and we see devastation. Those images, they're tough for us because they're fresh in our mind. The aftermath of the storm, it's still with us. And it's been a horrendous hurricane season. 300 deaths, 228 lives taken by Helene alone. Tens of billions of dollars in damage, and we watch it all unfold. And what does this church do? The beauty of this community is we respond. We fill up a semi-truck with tons of goods, and we send it down to North Carolina. I know friends from this church who said, I'm going to go down and help cut trees, and so that's what they do. But it's a lot to take in, and it's all a little bit confusing, isn't it? And we know the pain extends well beyond those far-off places. Suffering is something we all feel closely. Just think about your life, maybe the life of a loved one who's going through some stuff. If you want to sit here with me for a bit, I could pull up a chair and I could tell you of different moments of pain and suffering that my family has experienced. I could tell you about really hard seasons that we've had to endure. I could tell you about the hospital beds I've sat by of young adults losing a battle to cancer. I could tell you about the funerals that I've helped walk families through because the pain of this world swallowed up a loved one who took their own life. I could show you pictures of kids around the world who are dying of starvation and malnutrition. I could tell you stories of jobs lost, of addiction running rampant, of heartbreak and betrayal, of house fires and accidents that have ruined lives. I could go on and on describing a world that is full of pain and suffering, and you probably could too. But I don't think I need to convince you today that there's suffering in the world, do I? Well, we're all very much aware. And for many of us, all that pain and brokenness, all that suffering, it leads us to ask a question, like, how do I make sense of it all? If there's a good and loving God out there, how can there be so much pain in this world? Is God not able to stop it, or is he just not willing? I've asked those questions before, and I'm sure you have too. And while I wish there was a really easy, clean, and tidy answer for you today, let me just say there isn't. I don't have a great answer for you today, and I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, thanks so much, Pastor Jared. Glad I came to church today. But I want to point out a couple things. While the question is there, and while there's no clear-cut answer, the Bible very clearly shows us that God can handle our doubts and our questions, so bring them to him. Lay them at his feet. Wrestle with God a bit on this. I know I have asked the tough questions like this one. And while I'm not sure I have a great answer today, I do think the Bible gives us a response to the question we ask. And I believe that in that, there is a path that can bring you some kind of understanding. It can bring you some kind of peace. It can bring you some kind of comfort, but it can also bring you a lot of hope. And what I hope you understand today is that there is a God who is a good Father, one who sees us in our pain, who can sympathize with us in our weakness, and who knows the end of the story. He knows that healing is coming. He sees the broken arm, but he knows what comes afterwards. And he knows that pain and suffering do not ultimately win. They don't ultimately win because this isn't the way God intended it to be. So some will say, like, well, why did God even create a world with pain and suffering in it? And well, that's a pretty easy answer. He didn't. Surprise, okay? At the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1, we have the account of God's creation of the world, and it says this after 6 days. You want to know what God thinks of his creation? It says this, then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was what? Very good. The world was created. You and I were created without any pain or disappointment or suffering or anything like that. God made something beautiful and he breathed life into it. But we know that's not the end of the story because everything isn't good or right now. We know and we learn something really important about the world, about life, about the story of humanity. It's not all nice and tidy. It's a world that has a lot of pain. So what's up with that? If this good God created a good world, then why would there be suffering? Why would he allow it? And the only response I think I can give you is one pastor says, if love is a choice, then suffering is a possibility. If love is a choice, then suffering is a possibility. If it's possible to love, then it is possible to hurt. If love is a choice, then suffering is a possibility. God didn't set the world into motion with people like puppets on a string. Instead, he gives us a choice. He gives us free will, the ability to choose. We have the ability to choose love, then guess what? We can also choose hate. If you can choose what is right, then you can also choose what is wrong. God did not create or inject suffering and shove it into the world, but what he did create is a world in which we can be in relationship with him, but we get to choose that. He's never going to force it on you. And as the scriptures reveal, it's through our choosing of power and greed and selfishness or whatever it might be for you, the door of sin was opened, and so was the door of things not being the way God designed it to be any longer. And as Romans 5 points out, when Adam sinned, well, sin entered the world. It brought death, and death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. It's our ability to choose that the door to pain and suffering is opened for this world. Brad, just you and me here, okay? No one else listen in. Can I tell you something? It's a secret. Don't tell anyone. No one else can hear. It's just you and me. I oftentimes make choices that I'm not very proud of. Do you believe that? Why are you nodding your head? He can relate. Okay, well, thank you for sympathizing with me, okay? Just last week, we had a pickleball tournament in this room. Yo, I just recently got into pickleball. Let's go. I'm good, all right? I'm not very good yet, but I'm going to get there, so I will take you. I promise. But we did a pickleball tournament in here, and all the chairs come up, and we have and our gym that I go to, they wanted to do a pickleball tournament, so we hosted it. It was this really beautiful, like, gym and church colliding thing, and I was, like, the third time I had played. I was playing with Alan, who runs a bunch of our production stuff in the back, and we were in this one game, match, whatever you pickleballers call it, and we're playing, and the ball's flying back and forth, and like, we're playing against these two girls, and we are whooping them, okay? It is 10-5. I'm feeling really good about myself. I'm like, that's right. I am a pickleball pro. That is until these girls come back and we don't score. They're like, we were just messing with you. You ever seen Rounders? It's like Rounders, okay? They're like, we're going to get you. And they do. They come back and they beat us 12-10. And at the end, after they scored that last point, they scored it on me. I got so mad. I took my paddle and I threw it down. Everyone like in the gym turned and looked. They all walked over to where they were keeping the bracket. And I walk over right behind them. And they're like, yeah, we just beat those boys over there. It's like, okay, thanks. And that one guy threw his paddle down. I'm like, oh, the pastor did? Like, he's a pastor? Luckily, James, our sports pastor, was standing there too. He's like, hey, pastors have feelings also, okay? And what he was saying is like, hey, everybody, pastors or not, they all make bad decisions every now and then. Not every decision I make is making the world a better place. And even when I choose to do good things, the consequences of sin are still so present and real in a fallen world. There is pain and suffering all around us. Why do bad things happen to go? I don't know. All I can tell you is that according to Romans 3, all have sinned, so there are no good people except for one, Jesus Christ. And not only did bad things still happen to him, he volunteered for it. Why is there pain and suffering? Well, maybe the best response I can give you is say, because we have a choice. But I can also say with confidence, it's not because our God is absent. It's not because our God doesn't care. It's not because our God can't do something about it. It's because if love is a choice, then suffering is a possibility. He doesn't force himself on us. And with each decision made by each person that walks away from God's ideal design, it adds to the compounding problem that's been playing out since the very beginning. And I realize that response may fall flat with some, but it's the reality that we live in. If you think about it, okay, the very acknowledgement of good and evil, of right and wrong, doesn't it signal some kind of divine true north that points to what goodness is and looks like? Something that so many of us are striving for and towards? And so if you could see God's goodness in the world, there are all these little moments where you just imagine the goodness of God, where you can see it and experience it, and yet we deal with pain. We realize the complexity of the question, like it just makes it rattle around in our brain even more, and we find ourselves tipping the scales back and forth with understanding and confusion. But the punchline is we live in a world that's been run rampant with sin, and the consequences of sin are death, and that's just the way it is. It's kind of a buzzkill of an answer, isn't it? Well, yeah, it is for those who don't know Jesus. Because for those who know Jesus, while the answer is unsettling, they know the story isn't over yet. The good news is that pain and suffering and death isn't the end of the story. God didn't say, well, hey, y'all, you screwed up. Good luck to you. I'm going to wash my hands of this project and move on. No, the beauty of the Christian story is that we have a loving God, one who loves us enough to draw close, even in our choosing of a different path. Even in the consequences of a fallen world, God is there. He's not distant. He's not far off. He walks with us through the hurt of this world. And it's a relationship with him that he points to a day where the broken bones will be healed. The pain will be no more. As we kind of fall into his arms, he says, I have perspective to see what you can't in your moment of hurt. I can see what's coming, and it's healing. And as you read the scriptures, we realize the Bible, it doesn't avoid pain and suffering. You know, it's not trying to paint some kind of picture of this world that's inconsistent with our reality. The Bible makes it very clear that due to sin, pain and suffering are going to be normal. Sadness will come. There will be moments of great disappointment. There will be confusion and grief. Life will be hard. It's not what God wanted. It's not the way God intended it to be, but in a broken world, it's normal. And while the Bible clearly lives in the tension with us, it doesn't offer us platitudes like everything happens for a reason. But rather it sits in the complexity. And the Bible cries out with questions just as we do. And look at this, Psalm 42. It says, I cry, why have you forgotten me? Why must I wander around in grief, oppressed by my enemies? Or we can look at Psalm 94. Psalm 94 says, how long, O Lord, how long will the wicked be allowed to gloat? And where are you in all of this, God? Or Job, have you read the book of Job? It is a wild ride. Buckle up, go give it a read. But Job says this, I'm innocent, but it makes no difference to me. I despise my life. Or Jeremiah 12 says, why are the wicked so prosperous? Why are evil people so happy? Jesus himself, he experienced pain and suffering. He experienced grief when his friend John and his friend Lazarus died. He cried, he wept, he convulsed with grief. And he also knew that because of the evil that happens in this world, he himself would suffer. He could see that playing out. And he has this remarkable scene that plays out with his disciples. He says to his disciples, like, hey, sit here for a little while. But then he took Peter, James, and John along with him. And then he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed, he said. Jesus says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Jesus knew that death was coming for him, that he was going to experience incredible pain, and he felt the very same thing that we feel today. The Bible, it's not ignorant to pain and suffering and what we experience in this world. And even if solidarity doesn't bring you peace, maybe it will help you to better understand that in God's story, pain and suffering is unsettling. It's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not the desired outcome. And it hurts God when we experience hurt. We can't have all of the answers to why suffering exists. Like, why doesn't God just do away with it? But we do have perspective to understand the Christian story. The story the Bible is portraying. And it's one of creation and of fall, evil intruding into the story, the unwelcome guest. But it's also a story that's offering us a hopeful reminder, the clanging gong that the story is not yet over. If it were over, creation, fall, evil, that's it, then wouldn't we all just be living like miserable lives of hopelessness? But the scripture shows us the story of Jesus is one that even in our pain and suffering, we can find hope. We can find peace. We can find trust in a God who is still working amongst us even today. It's because of the redemptive work of God at play and his closeness and the promise of a life to come that the psalmist, the one who was once crying out to God in anger and frustration, can then in the same breath say this. He says, I'll put my hope in God. Why am I discouraged? Why am I sad? I'm going to put my hope in God. I'll praise him again, my Savior and my God. It's nestled in God's love that we can find help and hope. It's like Psalm 10 says, but you, God, you see the trouble of the afflicted. You consider their grief and you take it in hand. The victims commit themselves to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Or Psalm 34, it says, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. Over and over again in the Bible, we see not just the complaints to God, people shaking a fist in anger, mad that the world has gone so terribly wrong. But we also see the hopeful cries of praise because they know God's not done yet. And he's alive, and he's working to redeem the brokenness. We see a people in the Bible who knows the promise of God, and they lean into that promise, and they lean into it knowing that God is still working it out. It's a promise that still gives us hope today, hope beyond our pain. The arm may be broken, but the Father who holds you can see what's coming. You just need to rest in his arms. And at the center of that promise, it's Jesus and a cross. Why does God allow bad things to happen? I don't know exactly, but I do know what the answer is not. It's not because God doesn't love you. And Jesus is proof of that love. See, it's through Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection that he who was good became sin for us, taking on the sin of this world so that we could be forgiven, so that we can find hope, so that in a world that is tormented with pain, we can know that the story is not yet over and that God is working out good in some beautiful way. It's on the cross that Jesus shouted the very words that we so often feel. Again, the Psalms kind of echoing themselves. My God, why have you forsaken me? And yet it's on the cross that Jesus began the greatest demonstration of hope that any of us could ever ask for. The cross and Jesus' own suffering is central to the story, and it's the turning point. It's there that God watched his innocent son die a slow and painful death that he didn't deserve, taking on our sin and pain so that he could show us the full measure of his love. And as John 3:16 says, he loves you that much. For God loves you that much that he's willing to give his one and only son. He died for you. And through Jesus, the most beautiful life is put on display. A life lived perfectly. A life lived innocently. A life that was lived with love for me and love for you, love for us. He loved us so much that he was willing to experience the full measure of suffering himself, even though he didn't deserve it. So that in some mysterious way, those who follow him can find hope in a world as broken as this one. Why can we have that hope? Because his death isn't the end of the story. It's in Jesus' resurrection that he's giving us a foreshadowing of what's to come. And that's where we find our hope. Jesus died because of the pain of this world. But through the loving arms of God, he defeated death, walked out of the grave, and demonstrated to us all that pain will not win. And as Jesus unfolds this story to his disciples, he says, hey, I'm here, I'm with you, but there's a day coming when I won't be. I'm going to die, I'm going to be buried, but don't worry, the story's not over. He gives them these words that I think are also really helpful words for us today too. He says, I've told you these things. That whole story has planned itself out so that in me you may have peace. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Now look at the way this is playing out. In this world, you're going to have trouble, but take heart. Jesus, you're telling me I can have peace, and you're telling me there's going to be trouble. You're telling me to take heart. How is that possible? The word take heart here, it can literally be translated to say, to be of good courage or cheer. What? Jesus, you're saying that in this world, it's not there will be suffering, but we can still have courage and cheer? How does that make sense? It only makes sense because Jesus has come close and he is dealing with the trouble. Some may say to you, they may say to me, they've said, suffering and pain leads them to not be able to trust that there is a good and loving God out there. However, the Christian response, and I realize this is a uniquely Christian response, is that it's only because of our good and loving God stepping into the mess that we can endure the pain and suffering of this world. It's like Romans 8 points out, it's through his love, his sacrificial death, his resurrection power that I can live. That I can live this life that experiences pain and suffering and do so with an endurance and a peace and a hope because I know the story's not over. We find hope in the resurrection of Jesus because it points to a new day. It points to a new creation, like John tries to describe to us in Revelation 21. That day is a day where God is dwelling with his people. A place where the earth will be made new, a place where the pain of this world will be pushed out, a place where every tear is wiped away, where death is defeated once and for all, where mourning and crying and pain, they are cast out. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, it points to that future. And in the meantime, he says, I will sustain you in the waiting. I'm overcoming it. He draws near. He draws close. And the goodness of God through relationship with Jesus is made available to all of us who are wading through the mucky waters of a world that is so filled with pain and suffering. It's through him and him alone that we have hope and we can endure it. So what's the response to pain and suffering, to our brokenness? It's like God's there. He's wrapping you up in his arms. Just lean back into the Father's arms because he can see the healing that's coming. The break won't last forever. Give the love of Jesus a shot and see how it transforms the way you experience the brokenness of this world. Jesus told us pain will still come. Suffering will still be present, but you will be able to endure it because of the hope that you find in him. And if you're in a season where pain and suffering is getting the better of you, maybe you're struggling to see the Lord's goodness, let me encourage you to do what so many in the scriptures did. Look up. Look around. Realize he's with you. Sink back into his arms. Let him sustain you. Let him strengthen your soul. Lift your eyes towards him. You know, earlier I rattled off a whole bunch of places where we see evil and suffering in the world. And almost every single one of those examples I gave, I could also tell you a story of people who were in that space who had hope, who wouldn't allow the suffering and pain of this world to bring them down because they had hope, because they knew that Jesus was going to make all things right. They could see the Revelation 21 world that God was creating. I want to show you a video here in just a second. This is a video from a hospital bed, my buddy Preston. Preston's a good dude, beautiful guy, loved Jesus with everything. He gave so much of himself to the work of the Lord. Every time I'd see Preston at church, he'd shake my hand and he'd hurt me because he's like this big, strong, buff dude. He's like 20 years my senior, but man, he could mess me up. He'd see me, he'd shake my hand and be like, "You ever seen an old man with abs like these?" And Preston was a good, healthy dude. So much good he brought to this world. He was over at a friend's house helping him move, and he took an unfortunate spill and tumble down some steps. And in that fall, he experienced a traumatic brain injury. And they rushed him to the hospital. A couple surgeries later, the doctor said it doesn't look good. And for 2 weeks, his wife Terry sat by his hospital bed, and she felt pain. She felt suffering. She experienced the full measure of it. But as she would tell you, she never lost hope. She never lost hope. She was praying for a miracle. We all were praying for a miracle that wouldn't be the end of Preston's story here on earth. But she also had hope that if it was, the story wasn't over. After a couple weeks, the doctors called her and said, "Hey, there's nothing else we can do. It's time to pull him off life support." And so I called Terry and said, "Terry, what can we do for you?" And she said, "He just needs to be surrounded by his friends, his family, his people of faith. And we need to sing words of hope because we know the story isn't over." And so a bunch of us on that day, we gathered in Preston's room. Here's a picture of the room. Pretty sure we were breaking fire code. We didn't care. We were there for it. And in that room, there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of sadness. But that room was also so filled with hope because everyone in there knew that the story was not over. And so we sat around and we did the only thing we knew how to do. We sang songs of praise. We sang about our God who's with us in the middle of the hurt, who's with us in the middle of the pain. We sing songs about a God who knows what we experience. He experienced it himself, and we sing about a God who gives us hope because he says, this life, the pain and suffering, it's not the end of the story. There is more in store. It may be broken, but healing is coming. That's all we could do was sing to him, the one in which we find hope. I want you to see just a second of that. Check this out. We sat around that bed. To be honest, it was a room that was filled with pain and suffering. And yet the thing that was present mostly was the hope that we had. And there was hope because of a uniquely Christian story that tells us that God is close. He is close in spirit. He is close through his community. And the story is not over. God has not and will not fail. I asked Terry if I could share that with everyone this weekend, and she said, "Yeah, you gotta. You gotta. Because while it hurts still so bad, I have hope that the story is not over and more people need that hope. You have two options. You say the pain and suffering in this world means you can't believe in a good God. Or you can realize the Father has you in his arms and he's whispering to you, you can get through it. I got you. And because of his goodness, because of his love, because of his closeness, we can endure the pain and suffering in this world because we know the story is not done yet. We lift our gaze. We see our God. And we believe the future he says he has for us. I want to invite you to stand with me if you're able. We're going to sing here in just a second. As we stand, I just want to encourage you to maybe do one of two things in these next few moments. Like wrestle with God a little bit. If you're going through some pain and suffering, wrestle with him and listen to the words of the song. These words, they're rooted in the scriptures. And they tell us that we can have joy in the midst of the chaos of this world. We can have peace that doesn't make sense if we build our life on who Jesus is and his promise, the hope that we have in a future, that his resurrection points to the day when all things that are wrong will be made right. We rest in that. So sing, bend a knee, raise a hand, whatever you need to do. Allow the Spirit of God to get through whatever stubborn exterior you have and rest in his arms. Listen to him. Hey, you're going to get through it. I can see healing. We're going to have prayer partners that are going to make their way up front. Maybe you're in a season where it's intense. You're in a deep valley. You're feeling it. Something beautiful happened in that hospital room because we gathered together. The scriptures say, when you come together, when you carry each other's burdens, you fulfill the law of Christ. These people, they want to carry the burden with you. And so if you're in a season of suffering, during the song or after, whenever you're ready, you can come forward and there'll be some friends who want to pray with you. And all they're going to pray is the hope of Jesus into your life, into your mind, into your soul, because he's the only one that can sustain us in a world as broken as this. Jesus, we come before you. God, we listen to your words. We don't always like them. In this world, you will have trouble. You tell us that. But God, what you say next that's so good and so peaceful and can bring joy in the midst of chaos is that have peace, take courage, because I have overcome it. And Jesus, through your death, through your burial, through your resurrection, God, we have hope and a future with you, a future in which you are working all of this out for good in some mysterious and beautiful way. And so we simply come before you today, Lord, and we ask that you give us endurance. Help us find peace. Help us to rest in the hope of a promise in a world that's so broken. Jesus, we love you. Amen.